The moon hung low over Carson Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty streets where decent folk had long since shuttered their windows. Eleanor May Hutchins pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the general store, her heart hammering so hard she feared it might give her away. The carpetbag clutched in her trembling hands held everything she owned in this world: 2 worn dresses, her mother's Bible, and $17 she'd saved by taking and washing these past 3 years. Through the thin walls of the saloon next door, she could hear Big Jim Calhoun's booming laughter. The sound made her stomach turn. Tomorrow, he'd come calling with that marriage contract her stepfather had signed, selling her off like cattle to settle his gambling debts. At 19, Eleanor had seen enough of Big Jim's wives to know what fate awaited her in that grand house on the hill. Bruises hidden beneath fine silk, tears shed behind closed doors, and a slow death of the spirit that no amount of money could cure. She waited until a cloud passed over the moon before making her move. The stable boy, young Tommy, had left the back door unlatched as promised. Moved by the desperation in her eyes and the last $2 she could spare, inside, her father's old mare, Buttercup, nickered softly in recognition. Eleanor ran her hand along the horse's muzzle, whispering apologies for the hard ride ahead. "Shh, girl, we got no choice but to run." Her hands shook as she saddled the mare, every creak of leather sounding loud as thunder in the midnight quiet. She'd never traveled beyond the town limits, never slept under any roof but her family's. But staying meant becoming property, and Eleanor would rather face wolves and rattlesnakes than Big Jim's meaty fists. She led Buttercup out through the back, wincing at every hoofbeat on the packed earth. The edge of town loomed ahead. Beyond it, nothing but miles of sagebrush and uncertainty. Eleanor had heard tales of what happened to women alone in the wilderness: Indians, outlaws, wild animals, thirst, and sun that could drive you mad. But those were possibilities. Big Jim was a certainty. The first miles passed in a blur of fear. Eleanor kept looking back, expecting to see torches and hear the thunder of pursuit. But Carson Creek slept on, unaware that one of its daughters had chosen the unknown over the unbearable. By the time the eastern sky began to pale, she'd put 10 miles between herself and her prison. Buttercup's sides heaved with effort, and Eleanor knew they needed to rest. She found a cluster of cottonwoods near a dried creek bed and dismounted on unsteady legs. Her hands fumbled with the canteen. She'd managed to fill 2 at the well, but already she wondered if it would be enough. The vastness of the landscape struck her then, an endless sea of scrub and rock beneath a sky so wide it made her dizzy. She'd traded walls for emptiness, and for a moment, the magnitude of her decision threatened to overwhelm her. "No going back now," she whispered to Buttercup, who stood with her head low, exhausted. Eleanor loosened the saddle and let the mare graze on what sparse grass grew in the shade. She herself sat against a tree trunk, fighting the urge to cry. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, not out here where every drop of water might mean the difference between life and death. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the heat. Eleanor had worn her plainest dress, dark blue calico that wouldn't show dirt easily, but already sweat made it cling uncomfortably. She dozed fitfully through the afternoon, starting at every sound: the skitter of a lizard, the cry of a hawk overhead. When evening finally brought some relief from the heat, she saddled Buttercup again and continued west, always west, toward the setting sun and whatever fate awaited her there. 3 days passed in this pattern, riding by night, hiding by day. Her water ran low, then out completely. Eleanor's lips cracked and bled. Buttercup stumbled more frequently, and Eleanor knew the old mare couldn't last much longer without water. On the 4th morning, as she searched desperately for any sign of a spring or stream, she spotted something that made her heart nearly stop: a lone rider on the ridge above, sitting his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle. The sunrise painted him in silhouette: broad shoulders, wide-brimmed hat, the glint of spurs. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to the old Colt pistol she'd taken from her stepfather's drawer, though she'd never fired it and doubted she could hit anything if she tried. The rider had seen her too. He sat motionless for a long moment, and Eleanor felt his gaze like a physical weight. Then, slowly, he began to descend the ridge, not rushing, not threatening, but inevitable as the sunrise itself. Eleanor's mouth went even drier, if such a thing were possible. She'd heard enough stories to know that meeting a strange man out here, miles from anywhere, rarely ended well for a woman alone. But she was too tired to run, and Buttercup was beyond running anyway. So Eleanor stood her ground, one hand on the pistol butt, trying to look braver than she felt. The rider came closer, and details emerged from the morning haze. Dark hair that needed cutting, a face weathered by sun and wind, clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well-mended. A Winchester rifle rested across his saddle, and a pair of Colts rode low on his hips. He stopped 20 feet away, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been mockery or respect. Eleanor couldn't tell which. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was deep and rough as the desert itself. "You look to be in some trouble." Eleanor lifted her chin, though the gesture cost her. "I'm managing fine, thank you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's so. Your horse says different." His eyes, green as sage, she noticed, took in Buttercup's condition with knowing assessment. "When's the last time either of you had water?" Pride warred with desperation. Pride lost. 2 days, she admitted, the words scraping past her parched throat. The rider, cowboy, she supposed, though he wore no outfit's brand, swung down from his saddle with an economy of motion that spoke of years spent horseback. He unhitched a canteen from his saddle and walked toward her, stopping just out of arm's reach, close enough now that she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, close enough to smell leather and horse and man. "Name's Jake Thornton," he said, holding out the canteen. "And you can put that pistol away. If I meant you harm, ma'am, I'd have done it from up on that ridge." Eleanor hesitated, then slowly took the offered water. The first sip was heaven, cool and clean on her burning throat. She wanted to drain it all, but forced herself to drink slowly, aware of his watchful gaze. "Thank you," she managed when she'd drunk her fill. She brought water to Buttercup, who drank gratefully. "I'm Mary Smith." "Sure you are," Jake said dryly. "And I suppose you're out here taking the air for your health?" Eleanor flushed, caught in her lie. But what could she tell him? That she was a runaway? That she'd stolen a horse and a gun? That somewhere behind her, Big Jim Calhoun might already have men searching? "My business is my own, Mr. Thornton," she said stiffly. "That it is," he agreed. "But this desert don't care much about anybody's business. Kill you just as dead whether you're running to something or from it." He studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor had the unsettling feeling he could read every secret written on her face. "There's a water hole about 5 miles northwest. I'm headed that way myself, if you'd care to follow." Eleanor knew she should refuse. Accepting help from a stranger was dangerous. But Buttercup needed water, and she needed Buttercup. Without the mare, she'd die out here for certain. "I can find it myself if you point the way," she said. Jake shrugged. "Suit yourself. Head for that notch in the hills there, bare left at the split rock that looks like a preacher's pulpit. Water holes in a grove of mesquite. Can't miss it." He swung back into his saddle with the same fluid grace. "Course, there's also a den of rattlers near that split rock, and the Apache have been known to watch that water hole, but I'm sure a woman managing fine on her own won't have any trouble." He touched his hat again and turned his horse, clearly prepared to leave her to her fate. Eleanor watched his broad back for a moment, wrestling with fear and pride and the simple truth that she was in over her head. "Mr. Thornton," she called. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. I would be grateful for the guidance." His smile this time was less mocking, though she couldn't call it warm. "Smart choice. Mary Smith, let's get that horse of yours some water before she drops." As Eleanor mounted Buttercup and followed this dangerous stranger into the unknown, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd merely traded one form of captivity for another. But at least this cage had no walls. and the man leading her toward water had eyes that held their own shadows. Whatever Jake Thornton was running from, it had marked him as surely as Big Jim's fists would have marked her. Perhaps that was why she followed. Not trust, exactly, but recognition. Another wounded soul seeking redemption in the vast emptiness of the West. The sun climbed higher, and their shadows shortened on the hard-packed earth. Behind them, Eleanor's old life receded like a bad dream. Ahead lay only uncertainty, water, and the promise of survival for one more day. It would have to be enough. The waterhole lay hidden in a natural bowl of red rock, sheltered by gnarled mesquite trees that had somehow found purchase in this unforgiving land. Jake Thornton dismounted first, his movements careful and deliberate as he scanned the area. Only when he seemed satisfied did he gesture for Eleanor to approach. "Let the horses drink first," he said, leading his own mount, a rangy bay gelding, to the water's edge. "But not too much too fast. Make 'em sick." Eleanor watched how he controlled his horses drinking, then tried to do the same with Buttercup. The old mare fought her, desperate for water, and Eleanor's arms trembled with the effort of holding her back. Without a word, Jake moved to help, his hands joining hers on the reins. For a moment they stood close enough that Eleanor could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his sun-bronzed skin. "Easy does it," he murmured, though Eleanor wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the horse. When Buttercup had drunk enough, he stepped back, the loss of his steadying presence leaving Eleanor oddly bereft. She busied herself filling the canteens while Jake saw to the horses. The water was murky but drinkable, and Eleanor savored each sip as if it were fine wine. When she looked up, she found Jake watching her with an unreadable expression. "You never seen hard times before," he observed. It wasn't a question. Eleanor's backbone stiffened. "I've seen my share. Not like this." He gestured to encompass the harsh landscape around them. "This ain't no place for a lady. Whatever you're running from, it must be mighty bad. I told you, Mr. Thornton, your business is your own, I heard." He pulled makings from his shirt pocket and began rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "Just seems to me, a woman who calls herself Mary Smith and can't handle a thirsty horse might be in over her head." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "I suppose you think I should turn back, find myself a husband and settle down like a proper lady?" Something dark flickered across his face. "Last woman I knew who did that ended up buried beside a creek, not much different from this one." He struck a match with his thumbnail, the flame casting shadows across his weathered features. "No, ma'am, I wouldn't wish that on anybody." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of the horses and the whisper of wind through the mesquite. Eleanor studied him covertly, this strange man who'd appeared like a mirage when she needed help most. The way he held himself spoke of violence held in check, of a man who'd learned to sleep with one eye open, yet he'd shared his water, helped with her horse. The contradictions puzzled her. "Where are you headed, Mr. Thornton?" she asked finally. "Jake," he corrected. "And I'm headed nowhere in particular. Just away." "Away from what?" His smile held no humor. "From men who'd like to see me dance at the end of a rope. Present company accepted." "I hope." Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to her throat. An outlaw. Then, she should have known. Yet somehow the revelation didn't frighten her as it should have. Perhaps because she was an outlaw now too, in her way. A horse thief. A runaway. "I should go," she said, though the words came reluctantly. The thought of facing the desert alone again made her stomach clench. "In this heat, your horse won't make another mile." Jake ground out his cigarette and stood, dusting off his pants. "We'll rest here till evening. Then—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Then I'll see you as far as Culverson. 3 days' ride. If we're careful, railroad comes through there. You can catch a train to anywhere you've a mind to go." "I can't pay you," Eleanor said quickly. "Didn't ask for payment." His eyes held hers, and again she felt that unsettling sense of being seen. Really seen. "Just don't go pointing that old Colt at me again. Makes me nervous." Despite everything. Eleanor felt her lips twitch toward a smile. It isn't even loaded. I know. He settled back against a rock, tipping his hat low over his eyes. Get some rest. Mary Smith. Long road ahead. Eleanor wanted to protest that she couldn't possibly sleep, not with a strange man just feet away, but exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand, and the shade was so blessedly cool after days in the sun. She found a spot where she could keep both Jake and the horizon in view, wrapping her hand around the unloaded pistol for comfort. Sleep took her between one breath and the next. She woke to the sound of voices, male voices, rough with trail dust and bad whiskey. Eleanor's eyes flew open to find Jake already on his feet, positioned between her and 3 riders who'd appeared at the waterhole's edge. His hand rested casual-like on his gun belt, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. Well, Jake Thornton. The speaker was a thin man with a face like spoiled milk, pale and sour. Heard you might be in these parts. Amos. Jake's voice held all the warmth of a December morning. Still riding with trash. I see. The other 2 men bristled, hands moving toward their weapons, but Amos raised a hand to still them. That's no way to talk to old friends. Jake, we rode together once. That was before you started selling guns to the Apache, Jake said evenly. Before you burned out the Hendrickson place with the family still inside. Business is business. Amos's pale eyes slid past Jake to where Eleanor sat frozen. And what's this? Jake Thornton traveling with a woman? Will wonders never cease? Eleanor forced herself to stand on unsteady legs. The way the 3 men looked at her made her skin crawl, like beetles skittering across her flesh. She understood with sudden, crystal clarity that Jake Thornton might be dangerous, but these men were something worse. The lady's with me, Jake said, and there was warning in every word. Is she now? Amos grinned, showing teeth like old ivory. Seems a shame, keeping something that pretty all to yourself. Maybe we could come to an arrangement. The only arrangement we're going to come to, Jake said softly, is the one where you water your horses and move on, peaceful-like. 3-1. Jake, you always were good, but you ain't that good. No, Jake agreed, but I'm good enough to put a bullet in you before your boys clear leather. You want to die over water and a woman you never seen before? The moment stretched tight as wire. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, could see the calculation in Amos's pale eyes. Her hand found the butt of the unloaded Colt, a useless gesture, but the only one she had. Then Jake spoke again, so low she almost missed it. Besides, you don't want to tangle with her. Woman's got the lung fever. Why you think I'm keeping my distance? Taking her to the sanitarium in Culverson? Eleanor caught on immediately, raising a shaking hand to her mouth and coughing, a harsh, racking sound that echoed off the rocks. She swayed, letting Jake catch her elbow to steady her. See? Jake's smile was thin as paper. You boys are welcome to her if you want to risk it. Course, I hear the fever makes a man drown in his own blood. Ugly way to go. Amos took an involuntary step back. Disease was the one enemy a man couldn't outdraw, couldn't intimidate. His companions were already turning their horses. This ain't over, Thornton, Amos said, but he was backing away too. Carson's got $1,000 on your head, dead or alive. Tell Carson I'll be seeing him. Jake replied, real soon. The 3 men watered their horses quickly and rode out, casting nervous glances back. Only when they disappeared over the ridge did Jake release Eleanor's arm. She hadn't realized how hard he'd been gripping it until the blood rushed back. Lung fever? She asked weakly. First thing come to mind. He was already moving toward the horses. We need to go. Now. They'll figure out the truth soon enough. Eleanor didn't argue. Her hands shook as she saddled Buttercup, the encounter leaving her more rattled than 3 days alone in the desert. Jake worked beside her, efficient and calm, but she could see the urgency in his movements. Those men, she began, are the reason you don't trust strangers out here, he finished. Mount up. They rode hard through the cooling evening, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Jake led them through a maze of arrows and dry washes, doubling back twice, laying false trails. Eleanor clung to Buttercup's mane and tried not to think about what would have happened if she'd met Amos and his men instead of Jake. When full dark fell, he finally called a halt in a sheltered canyon. "No fire tonight," he said, and Eleanor didn't argue. They ate cold biscuits from his saddlebags and shared water in silence. The stars emerged one by one until the sky was ablaze with light. "Thank you," Eleanor said at last, "for what you did back there." Jake shrugged. "Didn't do it for thanks." "Why did you do it then?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough as sandpaper. "Had a sister once. She'd have been about your age." He stood abruptly. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Eleanor wanted to ask about the sister, about the woman buried by the creek, about the price on his head, but something in his posture warned her off. He stood at the canyon's entrance like a guardian statue, and Eleanor realized with a jolt that she trusted him, this outlaw, this stranger, this man with shadows in his eyes. She trusted him more than she'd ever trusted Big Jim or her stepfather or any of the respectable men in Carson Creek. She wrapped herself in the thin blanket he'd given her and tried to find a comfortable position on the hard ground. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, and its packmates answered, their voices rising in a wild chorus that made her shiver. "Jake?" she called softly. "Yeah?" "My name isn't Mary Smith." "I know. It's Eleanor. Eleanor May Hutchins." She heard him shift in the darkness. "Get some sleep. Eleanor May. Still got a long way to go." The morning came pale and cold. Desert air sharp enough to cut. Eleanor woke to find Jake already up, studying the horizon with the intensity of a man reading scripture. He'd kept watch all night, she realized, and guilt twisted in her stomach. "You should have woken me," she said, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I could have taken a turn." He glanced at her, and she caught a flicker of what might have been amusement. "You ever kept watch before? Eleanor May?" "No, but..." "Then you'd have been no use. Watching ain't just about staying awake. It's about knowing what belongs and what doesn't. Hearing the difference between a rabbit and a man trying to sound like a rabbit." He turned back to his vigil. "I'll teach you, if you've a mind to learn. But not when Amos might be doubling back." The casual offer surprised her. "You'd do that?" "Said I'd get you to Culverson. Can't do that if you get yourself killed trying to stand watch." He moved to the horses, checking their legs and hooves with practiced hands. "Besides, woman traveling alone needs to know these things." As they prepared to ride, Eleanor gathered her courage. "Last night, you said Carson has a bounty on you." Jake's hand stilled on his saddle. "That he does. What did you do?" "Killed his brother." The words were flat, matter of fact. Man needed killing, but Carson didn't see it that way. Eleanor waited, sensing there was more. Jake finished with his horse before continuing. Tom Carson liked hurting women, saloon girls, mostly, but any woman who caught his eye had money and men behind him, so nobody did anything about it. His jaw tightened. Until he picked the wrong girl. "Your sister?" "My wife." The words hit Eleanor like cold water. Of course, the woman buried by the creek, the shadows in his eyes. She'd been so focused on her own tragedy she hadn't recognized another walking wounded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jake swung into his saddle with that same fluid grace. "Was 5 years ago. Maria's been in the ground longer than we were married, but Tom Carson's been in the ground longer still, and that's what matters." They rode in silence through the morning, following game trails and dry washes. Jake taught her to read the land as they went, how to spot water by the flight of birds, how to tell fresh tracks from old, how to find north by the sun. Eleanor soaked it up like parched earth drinking rain. When they stopped at midday to rest the horses, he showed her how to load the old colt properly. 6 chambers, but only load 5, he instructed, watching her fumble with the bullets. Keep the hammer on the empty chamber. Safer that way. Have you killed many men? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Jake took the gun from her, demonstrating the proper grip. Enough to know it doesn't solve as much as you'd think. Here, hold it like this. Firm, but not strangling it. Eleanor tried to mirror his stance. The gun felt alien in her hands, heavy with possibility. Would you teach me to shoot? If we had time and bullets to spare, maybe, but shooting's the easy part. It's deciding when to shoot that's hard. He adjusted her grip slightly, his calloused fingers gentle on hers. Most times, waving a gun around just escalates things. Better to avoid trouble when you can. Like with Amos. That wasn't avoiding trouble, that was delaying it. His expression darkened. Men like Amos don't forget. He'll be back, eventually. Then why help me? Why take on my trouble too? Jake stepped back, considering her question. Maybe because I remember what it's like to have nowhere to run. Maybe because I'm tired of seeing men like Amos take whatever they want. He shrugged. Or maybe I'm just a fool who can't mind his own business. That evening, they made camp in a grove of cottonwoods beside a trickle of stream. Jake showed her how to build a small fire that would give heat without too much smoke, how to arrange rocks to reflect warmth. He produced a rabbit from somewhere. Eleanor hadn't even seen him draw his gun, and taught her to skin and clean it. Wasteful to shoot such small game, he explained, showing her the snare he'd used instead. Bullets are for men and big predators. Everything else, you trap or catch. They ate in companionable silence. The rabbit tough but filling. Eleanor found herself studying him in the firelight. This contradiction of a man. Gentle teacher one moment, cold killer the next. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. Something on your mind? You're not what I expected. She admitted. When I first saw you on that ridge, I thought... Thought what? That I'd be like Amos? His smile held bitter edges. Not all wolves run in packs. Eleanor may. Some of us prefer our own company. Is that what you are? A wolf. That's what Carson calls me, the Wolf of Willowbrook. That was my town, before. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. Had a ranch there, small place but mine. Maria kept chickens, grew vegetables. We were building something good. Eleanor heard the past tense, the weight of lost dreams. You could start over, build again. With $1,000 bounty? Carson's got reach from here to California. No place I could settle where he wouldn't eventually find me. He met her eyes across the fire. That's no life for a man. Always looking over his shoulder. Sure as hell no life for a woman. The implication hung between them. Unspoken, but clear. Whatever connection sparked in the space between them had no future. Eleanor felt an unexpected pang at the thought. What about you? Jake asked. What's waiting in Culverson? I don't know, she admitted. I have $17 and no plans beyond getting away from... She stopped, still unable to say Big Jim's name aloud. From a bad marriage? From a marriage that would have killed me, one way or another. The words came easier in the darkness, with only the fire between them. My stepfather sold me to pay his debts, like I was livestock. Jake's expression hardened. Some men need to learn women aren't property. Big Jim Calhoun doesn't learn. He takes, and he breaks, and nobody stops him because he owns half the county. Eleanor hugged her knees to her chest. I saw what he did to his other wives. I wouldn't become that. So you ran. So I ran. She managed a weak smile. Stole a horse and a gun and ran into the desert like a fool. Not a fool, Jake said firmly. Takes courage to choose the unknown over the unbearable. Most people just endure. Like you did? His jaw tightened. I endured plenty before Tom Carson went too far. Watched him hurt other women, told myself it wasn't my business. Maria paid for my cowardice. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? He stood abruptly. I knew what he was. If I'd acted sooner... He shook his head. Get some rest. I want to make good time tomorrow. Eleanor wanted to argue, to offer comfort, but she recognized the walls going up. Instead, she asked, Will you teach me to keep watch? He paused, then nodded slowly. 2 hours. I'll wake you then. She settled into her blanket, but sleep wouldn't come. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Jake take up his position at the edge of the firelight. He sat with his back to a tree, rifle across his knees, scanning the darkness with methodical patience. Every so often, his gaze would drift back to her, checking, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. For the first time since fleeing Carson Creek, she felt truly safe. Not because Jake would protect her, though she believed he would, but because he was teaching her to protect herself. When he woke her for watch duty, his hand on her shoulder was gentle. "Time to learn," he murmured. Eleanor took his place while he showed her what to look for, what to listen for. The night sounds that meant all was well. The sudden silences that meant danger. How to position herself so the fire didn't blind her to movement in the darkness. How to stay alert without exhausting herself. "Trust your instincts," he told her. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. Better to wake me for nothing than ignore a real threat." She nodded, gripping the rifle he'd placed across her knees. "Jake, thank you for all of this. I know I'm not your responsibility." In the dying firelight, she saw him almost smile. "Maybe not, but Maria would have liked you, would have wanted me to help." He settled into his bedroll, hat tipped over his eyes. 2 hours, then wake me. Don't try to be a hero." Eleanor kept watch as the fire died to embers and the stars wheeled overhead. She jumped at every sound at first, but gradually learned to distinguish normal from threatening. An owl hooted somewhere close, and she remembered Jake's lesson. Owls meant no large predators hunting nearby. For the first time since leaving home, she felt like she might actually survive this. Not just the desert, but whatever came after. Jake had given her more than protection. He'd given her knowledge, skills, confidence, tools to build a new life, even if he couldn't be part of it. When her 2 hours were up, she woke him reluctantly, proud that she'd managed her first watch without incident. He squeezed her shoulder in approval before taking over, and Eleanor fell asleep feeling like she'd passed some crucial test. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Amos was still out there somewhere, nursing his suspicions. But tonight, in this small circle of safety, with an unlikely protector keeping watch, Eleanor May Hutchins began to believe she might become someone stronger than the frightened girl who'd fled Carson Creek. The desert had tested her, but she was still standing, and with Jake Thornton's reluctant guidance, she was learning to stand on her own. The next morning brought lessons in earnest. Jake woke Eleanor before dawn, and instead of immediately breaking camp, he led her to a flat area beyond the cottonwoods. "Time you learned to handle that Colt proper," he said, setting up a row of tin cans he'd been carrying in his saddlebags. "Shooting's not just about pulling the trigger." Eleanor stood where he positioned her, feeling clumsy and uncertain. The gun felt heavier than it had the day before, weighted with new purpose. "Breathe," Jake instructed, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Most folks hold their breath when they aim. That's what makes them shake. He adjusted her stance, one hand on her shoulder, the other guiding her arms. "See that front sight? Line it up with the notch in back. Focus on the front sight. Let the target blur." Eleanor tried to follow his instructions, acutely aware of his presence behind her. When she squeezed the trigger, the gun bucked in her hands and the shot went wild, missing the cans entirely. "Again," Jake said patiently. "This time, squeeze slow, like you're pressing juice from a lemon." The second shot clipped the edge of a can, sending it spinning. Eleanor felt a surge of pride entirely out of proportion to the achievement. "Better." Jake stepped back, letting her try on her own. "Remember, in a real situation, you likely won't have time to aim pretty. Sometimes just making noise is enough to scare off trouble." They practiced until Eleanor's arms ached and her ears rang. She managed to hit 3 cans out of 20 shots, which Jake declared respectable for a first lesson. As they packed up, he taught her how to clean the gun, how to check for fouling that could cause a misfire. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor asked as she worked oil into the metal. Teaching me all this. Jake was quiet for a moment, packing away the remaining cans. Maybe because someone should have taught Maria. Maybe if she'd known how to defend herself. He shrugged. Can't change the past, but I can make sure you don't end up the same way. They rode through country that grew rougher by the mile, red rock giving way to broken badlands. Jake taught her to read the weather and the movement of clouds, to find edible plants among the scrub. When they stopped to rest the horses, he showed her how to fashion snares from hair pulled from Buttercup's tail, how to find water by following game trails. The desert wants to kill you, he explained, demonstrating how to test unknown plants for poison. But it also provides everything you need to survive, if you know where to look. Eleanor absorbed each lesson like a woman dying of thirst. This was nothing like the genteel education she'd received in Carson Creek, embroidery and scripture and how to make proper conversation. This was practical knowledge, survival skills that could mean the difference between life and death. That afternoon, Jake spotted dust on their back trail. Without a word, he led them off the main path into a maze of weathered stone pillars. They dismounted and climbed, leading the horses up a treacherous slope to a hidden ledge. Could be nothing, he said, but his hand rested on his rifle. Could be Amos, could be someone else. Either way, best to let them pass. They waited in tense silence as the dust cloud resolved into riders. 4 men Eleanor didn't recognize, moving fast and purposeful. Jake watched them through narrowed eyes. Bounty hunters, he said quietly. Not after you. They're tracking someone else. But best we weren't seen anyway. When the riders had passed, they descended carefully. Jake chose a new route, one that would keep them off the main trails. The going was slower but safer, he said, and Eleanor didn't argue. That evening, they camped beside a spring hidden in a box canyon. Jake showed her how to hobble the horses so they could graze without wandering, how to read the stars for direction. Never depend on just one method, he told her, pointing out the North Star. Compass can break. Sun can be hidden by clouds, but the stars are always there, even when you can't see them. Eleanor practiced with the colt again while there was still light, Jake correcting her form with infinite patience. This time she hit 5 cans and felt like she'd conquered the world. You're a quick study, he said, and the rare praise warmed her more than the campfire. As darkness fell, Jake produced a small leather pouch from his saddlebags. Inside were needles and thread, which he handed to her along with his spare shirt. Tore it on a branch yesterday, he explained. You know how to mend? Of course, Eleanor was grateful for a skill she actually possessed, as she worked by firelight, making tiny, even stitches. She felt Jake watching her. You'll do all right, he said suddenly. Whatever you decide to do in Culverson, you'll do all right. Eleanor looked up from her sewing. You sound like you're saying goodbye. Day after tomorrow, I will be. His expression was unreadable in the flickering light. That's when we reached town. The needle pricked Eleanor's finger, and she sucked at the beat of blood. What if I didn't take the train right away? Eleanor May. The way he said her name was gentle, but firm. You know what I am. What kind of life I lead, that's no future for you. I'm not asking for a future, she said, though her heart insisted she was lying. I'm just saying maybe I need more lessons. Maybe I'm not ready to be on my own yet. Jake stood abruptly, moving to check on the horses. You're ready. Readier than you know. Eleanor finished mending his shirt in silence, each stitch feeling like a small goodbye. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed, and Jake didn't immediately pull away. Tell me about Maria, she said softly. What was she like? Jake settled back against his saddle, staring into the fire. Small, dark-haired, laughed at everything, even my bad jokes, especially my bad jokes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Her father ran the general store. Didn't want her marrying a rancher with no prospects, but she wore him down. Said I made her feel safe. You loved her. More than I knew was possible. The smile faded. Tom Carson took that from me. Took her light out of the world because he could, because nobody would stop him. Eleanor moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. It wasn't your fault. I keep telling myself that. 5 years, and I still see her face when I close my eyes. Still hear her. He stopped, jaw clenched, without thinking. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. His fingers were calloused, scarred, strong. After a moment, they closed around hers. She was lucky, Eleanor said, to have someone who loved her that much, who still carries her memory. Jake looked at their joined hands with something like wonder. Since she died, I haven't let anyone. He pulled away gently. You should get some rest. Long day tomorrow. Eleanor returned to her bedroll, but sleep was elusive. She watched Jake take first watch, his silhouette dark against the stars. In 2 days, they would reach Culverson and part ways. She would board a train to somewhere, anywhere, and he would fade back into the desert like a dust devil, pursued by ghosts and bounty hunters. The thought hurt more than it should. In just a few days, this dangerous, gentle, complicated man had become important to her, not just as a protector, but as a teacher, a friend, maybe something more if circumstances were different. When Jake woke her for her watch, he paused beside her bedroll. That thing you said, about Maria being lucky. You're wrong. He touched her face briefly. A whisper of contact. Man like me. I'm poison to anyone fool enough to care. Remember that. Eleanor caught his hand before he could pull away completely. You're not poison, Jake Thornton. You're just hurt. There's a difference. He stared at her for a long moment, then retreated to his bedroll without another word. Eleanor took up her watch position, rifle across her knees, heart beating too fast. 2 more days. 2 more days to learn everything she could from this man who'd shown her strength she didn't know she possessed. 2 more days to pretend that goodbye wouldn't feel like tearing off a piece of her soul. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human pain and longing. But Eleanor watched them anyway, remembering Jake's lessons, the North Star to guide her home. Except she had no home now, only the promise of a train ticket and an uncertain future. Maybe that's what Jake was really teaching her. Not just how to shoot and track and survive, but how to be alone, how to carry loss without letting it break you, how to keep moving when every instinct screamed to stop, to rest, to belong somewhere. A coyote called in the distance, and Eleanor didn't flinch. Progress, she thought, day by day. Lesson by lesson. She was becoming someone new, someone who might actually survive whatever came next, even if surviving meant saying goodbye to the first person who'd made her feel truly safe since her father died. When her watch ended and she woke Jake, she allowed her hand to linger on his shoulder for just a moment. He caught it, squeezed gently, then let go. Good watch, he said. You're learning. Eleanor returned to her bedroll, wrapping herself in the thin blanket that still smelled faintly of sage and leather and him. Yes, she was learning. Learning to shoot, to track, to read the land and sky, but also learning how the heart could want impossible things, how safety could become its own kind of trap, how sometimes the bravest thing was to keep moving even when everything in you wanted to stop. 2 more days. She would make them count. The dust cloud appeared just after noon, too deliberate to be wind-driven. Jake spotted it first. His whole body going still in that way Eleanor had learned meant danger. Without a word, he guided them off the trail into a narrow ravine choked with greasewood. How many? Eleanor whispered, her hand moving instinctively to the Colt at her hip. 6, maybe 7. Jake's eyes never left the horizon. Moving with purpose. They know we're here somewhere. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Amos? Maybe. Or maybe someone finally connected you to a missing horse in Carson Creek. He turned to her, his expression grave. Either way, we can't outrun them. Not with Buttercup already tired. The mare was indeed showing signs of exhaustion. Her head low, sides streaked with dried sweat. Jake's bay was in better condition, but carrying more weight. Fighting their way out wasn't an option. Not against those odds. There's a place, Jake said. already turning his horse. Old Apache hideout. If we can reach it. They rode hard through the ravine, stones clattering beneath the horses' hooves. Behind them, Eleanor could hear voices now, growing closer. Jake led them up a treacherous slope, the horses scrambling for purchase on loose shale. At the top, hidden behind a wall of red rock, was a cave mouth barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. "Inside! Quick!" Jake ordered, dismounting and leading his bay into the darkness. Eleanor followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cave opened into a larger chamber, ceiling blackened by ancient fires. Jake worked quickly, positioning the horses toward the back, checking his weapons. He handed Eleanor his rifle. "You remember what I taught you?" She nodded, though her hands trembled as she checked the rifle's load. "Jake, if it's Big Jim's men, then they're here for you, not me. Might be I can lead them off. Give you time to—" "No." The word came out sharper than Eleanor intended. "We stay together." Jake looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his green eyes. "Stubborn woman. I learned from the best." Despite everything, his lips quirked in what might have been a smile. Then the voices outside grew louder, and there was no more time for words. "Jake Thornton!" The voice echoed off the rocks, gravelly and mean. Not Amos, someone Eleanor didn't recognize. "We know you're up there. Come on out, and we'll make it quick." Jake positioned himself at the cave mouth, just out of sight. "That you, Dutch McCready? Thought you were too old for bounty hunting. $1,000 buys a lot of retirement. Thornton, nothing personal. Always is personal when men come to kill you." Jake called back. "How many of Carson's coins are weighing down your pockets?" Eleanor heard movement outside, boots on stone, the metallic sound of weapons being readied. She counted at least 5 distinct voices, maybe more. Her mouth went dry. "Here's what's going to happen," Dutch continued. "You come out nice and peaceful, and we won't hurt the woman. Yeah, we know she's with you. Amos Pike told us all about her. Pretty little thing. He said, be a shame if something happened to her." Jake's jaw tightened. He glanced back at Eleanor, and she saw him calculating, weighing her life against his pride. She shook her head fiercely. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare give yourself up for me. Might be the only way. Then we find another way." Eleanor moved closer, keeping her voice low. "You taught me to survive, so let me help us survive this." Outside, Dutch was growing impatient. "Running out of patience. Thornton, maybe we'll just smoke you out like rabbits." Eleanor's mind raced. Then she remembered something Jake had taught her. Sometimes the best weapon was misdirection. She raised her voice. "Letting it carry outside?" "Mr. McCready? This is Mrs. Mary Thornton. My husband and I are just passing through to Culverson. I don't know anything about any bounty." Silence greeted her words. Jake stared at her, eyebrows raised. She continued, putting a quaver in her voice. "Please, I'm with child. We're just trying to reach the doctor in town. Jake's not the man you're looking for. He's a farmer from Nebraska." She heard the men conferring outside, voices lowered. Jake leaned close to her ear. "Mrs. Thornton. Would you rather I said sister?" Eleanor whispered back. "Wives get more sympathy." "Farmer from Nebraska? You don't look like a farmer from Nebraska." Despite the danger, she caught what might have been admiration in his eyes. Then Dutch spoke again. "Nice try, lady, but we've been tracking Jake Thornton for 2 days. We know exactly who he is." "Then you know I don't leave witnesses," Jake called out, his voice gone cold and dangerous. "Ask Tom Carson? Oh, wait, you can't." "You can't take all of us, Thornton. Don't need to take all of you, just need to take you, Dutch. The rest of your boys will scatter like quail once you're down." Jake checked his Colts, movements calm and deliberate. "Course, 2 or 3 of them might catch bullets first. You want to tell them which ones?" Eleanor could practically feel the tension outside. Men who rode for money weren't eager to die for it. Jake had taught her that too. Most confrontations were won or lost before the first shot. Then she heard something else. Hoofbeats. Approaching fast. Multiple riders. Jake heard it too, his expression grim. More trouble. When they already had plenty, but the voice that rang out next made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Stand down, boys. The woman's mine." Big Jim Calhoun. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. Somehow he'd found her, tracked her across all these miles. She heard Jake curse under his breath. "This ain't your fight, mister," Dutch protested. "We're here for Thornton, and I'm here for my property." Big Jim's voice was closer now. "Girl stole my horse, humiliated me in front of the whole town." "That's a hanging offense where I come from." "I'm not your property," Eleanor shouted, anger overcoming fear. "I was never your property. Your stepfather's signature says different. Girl, bought and paid for, legal and binding. Now come out before I lose my temper." Jake touched Eleanor's arm. How many men would he bring? 3, maybe 4. He likes to travel with enough guns to feel brave. So we're looking at 9 or 10 men total. Jake's smile was sharp as a blade. "I've had worse odds." "Jake, no, there has to be another way." "There is." He pulled her deeper into the cave, his voice urgent. "Back of this cave, there's a narrow passage. Leads out to the other side of the ridge. Take Buttercup and go. I won't leave you." "You will." His hands gripped her shoulders. "This is my fight, not yours. You made it yours when you helped me, and I'll finish it, but not with you here." His eyes bored into hers. "Please, Eleanor. I can't watch another woman die because of my choices." "I'm not Maria." The words came out harsher than intended, but Eleanor didn't care. "I'm not some helpless victim. You taught me to fight, so let me fight." Outside, the situation was deteriorating. She could hear Big Jim arguing with Dutch, 2 predators squabbling over prey. Soon they'd stop talking and start shooting. "Eleanor," Jake's voice was soft now, almost tender. "You asked why I helped you. Truth is, I saw something in you that first day. Strength, courage, the kind of spirit that deserves to run free, not die in some cave over men's pride." "Then why are you asking me to run?" "Because living is winning. Because every day you're free is a day Big Jim doesn't own you." He pressed something into her hand. A small leather pouch, heavy with coins. "There's enough here to get you started somewhere new. California, maybe, or Oregon." "Jake, go!" He touched her face, just once, the gesture saying everything his words couldn't. "Go now, while they're still arguing." Eleanor wanted to protest, to rage, to refuse. But she saw the resolution in his eyes, the acceptance of a man who'd made peace with his fate, and she remembered his lessons. Sometimes the brave choice wasn't the obvious one. "Promise me," she said fiercely. "Promise you'll try to get out alive. I promise to do what needs doing." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was all he would give. Eleanor grabbed the saddlebags with shaking hands, then stopped. Before she could think better of it, she kissed him, quick and fierce and tasting of desperation. He froze for just a moment, then responded, one hand tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, his eyes held wonder and regret in equal measure. "Go," he said roughly, "before I'm fool enough to ask you to stay." Eleanor led Buttercup toward the back passage, tears blurring her vision. Behind her, she heard Jake moving toward the cave mouth, heard him chamber rounds in his Colts. "Dutch! Big Jim!" His voice rang out clear and strong. "Here's my offer. The woman rides out the back while we settle this face to face. Just me against your best gun. Winner takes all. You think we're stupid? Thornton?" That was Dutch, suspicious. "I think you're practical. You lose men in a cave fight, even if you win. This way, most of you go home breathing." Eleanor paused at the passage entrance. Looking back, Jake stood silhouetted against the light, every line of his body ready for violence. Their eyes met across the darkness, and he nodded once. "Go!" She went, leading Buttercup through the narrow passage as the negotiating continued behind her. The mare barely fit, sides scraping stone, but they pushed through. When they emerged on the far side of the ridge, Eleanor could hear shouting from the other side. But no gunfire. Not yet. She should run. Every lesson Jake had taught her said to run. to survive, to live free. But as she stood there holding Buttercup's reins, Eleanor realized she'd learned another lesson too. Sometimes there were things worth more than survival. Sometimes running wasn't freedom. It was just another kind of cage. She tied Buttercup to a sturdy bush, checked the colt at her hip, and started climbing back toward the sound of voices. Jake Thornton had taught her to shoot, to track, to survive, but he'd also taught her to choose her battles. And this one, she chose. The gunfire had stopped by the time Eleanor reached a vantage point above the cave. 3 bodies lay still in the dust, Dutch McCready's men. From the look of them, Jake stood with his back to the rock wall, both Colts drawn, facing off against Big Jim and his remaining men. Blood seeped through Jake's shirt near his ribs, but he stood steady. "Seems your boys weren't as fast as they thought," Jake said, his voice carrying despite the distance. Big Jim sat his horse like a king on a throne, face purple with rage. "Where's the girl, Thornton?" "Long gone, probably halfway to Culverson by now." Eleanor's hands shook as she watched from behind a boulder. She'd circled wide, coming up on Big Jim's flank. The Colt felt heavy in her grip, heavier than during practice. This wasn't tin cans. These were men, and despite everything, the thought of killing made her stomach churn. Then Big Jim spoke again, and her hesitation vanished. "No matter, I'll track her down after we finish with you, and when I find her, she'll learn what happens to women who run from me. Should have seen what I did to the last one who tried." Jake's expression didn't change, but Eleanor saw his finger tighten on the trigger. "You always were a yellow coward. Calhoun, takes a real big man to beat women, and it takes a fool to die for one who ain't even yours." Big Jim gestured to his men. "Take him." Everything happened at once. Jake's guns roared, dropping one of Big Jim's men before he'd cleared leather. The others scattered for cover, firing wild. Jake rolled behind a rock as bullets chipped stone where he'd been standing. Eleanor knew she had seconds before they overwhelmed him. No time for fear, no time for doubt. She stood, sighted down the barrel like Jake had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. Her shot took one of Big Jim's men in the shoulder, spinning him around. Everyone froze, searching for this new threat. Big Jim spotted her first, his face contorting with rage and something else, triumph. Well, little Eleanor, playing with guns." He spurred his horse toward her position. "Saves me the trouble of hunting you down." Eleanor fired again, but shooting at a moving target was nothing like practice. The bullet went wide. Big Jim kept coming, and she saw Jake break from cover, trying to intercept. "Eleanor, get down." But she stood her ground, fumbling to cock the hammer again. Big Jim was almost on her when Jake's bullet caught his horse in the chest. The animal screamed and went down, sending Big Jim tumbling into the dust. The fall should have killed him, or at least broken bones. But Big Jim rolled to his feet with surprising agility for such a large man, drawing his own gun. Eleanor found herself staring down the barrel, frozen by the hatred in his eyes. "Should have stayed put, girl. Would have made it easier on you." The gunshot was impossibly loud. Eleanor flinched, waiting for the impact, but it was Big Jim who staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his vest. He turned to see Jake standing behind him, smoking Colt in hand. "That's for thinking you could own her," Jake said quietly. "And this is for Maria." The second shot dropped Big Jim to his knees. He swayed there a moment, disbelief replacing rage on his face. Then he toppled forward and lay still. The remaining men, both Big Jim's and what was left of Dutch's group, looked at each other uncertainly. Jake turned to face them, and despite the blood soaking his shirt, despite being outnumbered 5-1, not a man among them moved. "Your employers are dead," Jake said. "No bounty is worth joining them. Ride out now, and we're square. Stay, and I'll drop every last one of you." One of Dutch's men spoke up. "What about Carson's bounty?" "Tell Carson I'll be coming for him next. He wants his money's worth. He can face me himself instead of sending hired guns." The men exchanged glances, then began backing toward their horses. Within minutes, The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving only dust and death behind. Jake stood motionless until they were gone. Then his knees buckled, and Eleanor barely caught him before he hit the ground. "Damn fool woman," he muttered, though his hand found hers and held tight. "Told you to run." "And you told me living is winning," Eleanor shot back, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind his wounds. "Can't very well live if you're dead. Can I?" The bullet had passed through the meat of his side, painful but not fatal if kept clean. Eleanor worked with steady hands, remembering the doctoring she'd learned from her mother. Jake watched her through pain-narrowed eyes. "You came back." "Of course I came back." She tied off the bandage, perhaps tighter than necessary. "Did you really think I'd leave you to face them alone?" "Hoped you would, for your own sake." Eleanor sat back on her heels, studying his face. "My whole life, men have been telling me what's for my own sake. My stepfather, Big Jim, even you. Maybe it's time I decided that for myself." Jake reached up, touched the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Eleanor May, you listen to me. Jake Thornton." Her voice shook, but her gaze was steady. "You saved my life. You taught me to save myself. You gave me choices when everyone else just wanted to take them away. So don't you dare tell me it was wrong to choose you." They stayed like that for a long moment, the desert wind carrying away the gun smoke, leaving only truth between them. Then Jake spoke, his voice rough with more than pain. "That day by the waterhole, when I first saw you, thought you were just another fool Eastern woman who'd die inside a week. But you looked at me with those eyes, all fierce and scared and determined, and I thought—" He swallowed hard. "I thought maybe Maria sent you one last gift to remind me there was still something worth protecting in this world." Eleanor's heart clenched. "Jake, I'm no good for you. Got too much blood on my hands, too many ghosts following me. You deserve better than a life on the run." "What I deserve," Eleanor said firmly, "is a life I choose. And I choose the man who saw me as more than property, who taught me strength I didn't know I had, who made me feel safe for the first time since my father died." She took his face in her hands, forced him to meet her eyes. "I choose you, Jake Thornton, if you'll have me." Jake stared at her like she was water in the desert, salvation and torment all at once. "You don't know what you're asking. Then teach me, like you taught me everything else." Eleanor's smile was watery but real. "I'm a quick study, remember?" Jake pulled her down into a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and blood and promises. When they broke apart, he was almost smiling. Stubborn woman, stubborn man. They helped each other to the horses, Jake leaning heavily on Eleanor's shoulder. Big Jim's saddlebags yielded medical supplies and enough money to see them through. Eleanor felt nothing but relief looking at his still form. The past was dead. Only the future mattered now. As they prepared to ride, Jake caught her hand. "That thing you said during the standoff, about being my wife." Eleanor blushed but held his gaze. "Just a story, to confuse them." "Maybe it doesn't have to be just a story." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "There's a preacher in Culverson. If you meant what you said about choosing, I meant every word." Jake lifted her hand to his lips, the gesture oddly formal from a man who just killed 3 people. "Then Eleanor May Hutchins, would you do me the honor of making an honest man out of me, such as that's possible? Despite everything, the violence, the blood, the uncertain future ahead." Eleanor laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, surprising them both. "I suppose someone has to keep you out of trouble," she said. "Might as well be me. Fair warning, I'm considerable trouble. Good thing I'm a quick study." They mounted up as the sun peeked overhead, casting short shadows on ground stained with violence. But Eleanor felt no urge to look back. Ahead lay Culverson, and beyond that, a life of their own making. It wouldn't be easy. Carson's bounty still stood, and Jake's reputation would follow them. But they'd face it together, 2 wounded souls who'd found healing in the most unlikely place. "You realize," Jake said as they rode, "you just admitted to being Eleanor May Hutchins in front of witnesses. If any of those men talk, they'll know you helped steal a horse." Eleanor considered this. "Then I guess we'll have to stay on the move. Good thing you're teaching me to survive on the trail." "That mean you're planning to stick around for more lessons?" She reached over, twined her fingers with his. "I told you at the waterhole, my business is my own, and my business, Jake Thornton, is you." His grip tightened on hers. "You're my first, Eleanor, first person since Maria to make me want to try again, to be better than what I've become." Eleanor's throat tightened at the echo of words yet unspoken, confessions that would come later, when the wounds had healed and trust had deepened to something more than desperation and need. For now, this was enough. "And you'll be my last," she said softly. "The last man to ever make me feel like property. From now on, I belong to no one but myself, and I choose to stand beside you." Even knowing what that means, the running, the fighting, the never settling down, especially knowing that, Eleanor squared her shoulders, looking ahead to the horizon. "You taught me to survive. Jake, now teach me to live." They rode toward Culverson as the sun began its descent. Two outlaws bound by choice rather than law, by love rather than paper contracts. Behind them, the desert reclaimed the violence, patient and eternal. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain but theirs to shape. And for the first time since she'd fled Carson Creek, Eleanor May Hutchins felt truly free. The storm rolled in from the west like God's own fury, black clouds swallowing the sun while they were still 10 miles from Culverson. Jake had been watching it build all afternoon, his face growing grimmer with each rumble of thunder. "We need shelter," he said, scanning the barren landscape. "This is going to be bad." Eleanor had never seen a desert storm, but the electricity in the air made her skin prickle with warning. The horses danced nervously, ears flat against their heads, when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Jake pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. "There, ride hard!" They spurred the horses into a gallop, racing the storm, but the desert had been waiting for rain, and the hard-packed earth turned to treacherous mud within minutes. Buttercup stumbled, nearly going down, and Eleanor fought to keep her seat. The wind hit them like a physical force, driving rain that felt like needles against exposed skin. Eleanor could barely see Jake through the sheets of water, just a dark shape fighting to control his own mount. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the earth. They reached the rocks just as the full force of the storm struck. Jake leaped from his saddle, dragging Eleanor into a shallow overhang that offered minimal protection. The horses huddled close, their terror evident in the whites of their eyes. "Flash flood!" Jake shouted over the storm's roar. "These arroyos fill fast. We need to get higher." But even as he spoke, Eleanor heard it, a sound like distant thunder that had nothing to do with the storm. Water, massive amounts of it, racing through the canyon system toward them. Jake grabbed her hand and they scrambled up the rocks, slipping on wet stone, fighting for every handhold. The wall of water hit just as they reached a ledge 15 feet up. Eleanor watched in horror as it swept past below, carrying trees, debris, and boulders like toys. If they'd been seconds slower— "The horses!" she cried, but Jake held her back. "They're smart. They'll find high ground." His arms wrapped around her as she shivered, though whether from cold or fear, she couldn't say. "Nothing we can do now but wait it out." They pressed against the rock face, Jake sheltering her with his body as the storm raged. Lightning split the sky in blinding forks, illuminating a landscape transformed. The dry washes had become raging rivers, the familiar landmarks erased by water and fury. Eleanor had thought she understood the desert's dangers, the heat, the thirst, the predators. But this was something else entirely, nature revealing its true power. She pressed closer to Jake, feeling the solid warmth of him against the chaos. "You all right?" he asked, lips close to her ear. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His arms tightened around her, and despite everything, she felt a curious sense of peace. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The storm lasted hours, though time lost meaning in the violence of wind and water. When it finally began to ease, the sun was setting, painting the wet rocks in shades of gold and crimson. The flood had receded, leaving behind a landscape scoured clean. Jake climbed down first, testing each foothold carefully. The ground was treacherous with mud and debris. Eleanor followed, her limbs stiff from holding still so long. At the bottom, they surveyed the damage. Their supplies were gone, swept away by the flood. Jake's rifle, their food, the medical supplies they'd taken from Big Jim. All lost. Only what they carried on their persons remained. Could be worse, Jake said philosophically. We're alive. A whinny drew their attention. Jake's bay stood on a rise 50 yards away, mud-caked but unharmed. Eleanor's heart leaped, then sank. No sign of Buttercup. She might have made it, Jake said gently. Horses are survivors, but Eleanor knew better. The old mare had been exhausted even before the storm. She closed her eyes, grieving for the faithful animal who'd carried her to freedom. I'm sorry, Jake said. I know she meant something to you. She was my last link to home. Eleanor's voice was steady despite the tears. My father raised her from a foal, taught me to ride on her back. Then she died free, not penned up in Big Jim's stable. Jake squeezed her shoulder. That matters. They salvaged what they could and started walking, leading Jake's tired horse. The storm had cooled the air, but walking in wet clothes and squelching boots was its own misery. Jake kept them moving, using the stars to navigate once darkness fell. Near midnight, they spotted lights ahead. Not Culverson, they were still miles from town, but a small ranch tucked into a valley. Jake stopped, considering. Could be trouble, he said. Ranch this isolated. They might shoot first and ask questions later. Or they might help, Eleanor countered. We need food, dry clothes. Your wound needs tending. Jake touched his side, where the bandage showed fresh red. The exertion had reopened the bullet wound. All right, but let me do the talking. They approached slowly, Jake calling out well before they reached the house. Hello, the ranch. Travelers seeking shelter. A lamp flared in a window. Then the door opened, revealing a weather-beaten man holding a shotgun. State your business. Got caught in the storm, Jake said. Lost our supplies in a flash flood. We can pay for food and shelter. The man studied them, taking in their bedraggled appearance. His gaze lingered on Eleanor, noting her torn dress and tangled hair. You folks married? Yes, sir, Eleanor said before Jake could answer. Newlyweds, heading to Culverson to catch the train west. The rancher's expression softened slightly. Well, can't leave a lady standing in the cold. Come in, but the guns stay on the porch. Jake hesitated, then unbuckled his gun belt. Eleanor knew what it cost him to go unarmed. Inside, they found warmth and light in the blessed smell of coffee. The rancher's wife, a plump woman named Mrs. Hardy, took one look at them and began issuing orders. Lord have mercy, you're soaked through. Beth, heat water for baths. Samuel, fetch clean clothes from the trunk. Mister, you're bleeding. Sit down before you fall down. Before Eleanor quite knew what was happening, she found herself in a tin tub of hot water, scrubbing away mud and fear and the lingering smell of gunpowder. Mrs. Hardy had given her a simple calico dress, worn but clean. When she emerged, she found Jake already cleaned up, wearing borrowed clothes that were too short in the arms. Mrs. Hardy had rebandaged his wound with skilled hands. You're lucky, she told him. Inch to the left and we'd be digging a grave. They shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, the best food Eleanor had tasted in days. The Hardys asked no uncomfortable questions, though Eleanor caught them exchanging glances when Jake moved with the controlled grace of a man who lived by the gun. Storm washed out the road to Culverson. Mister, Hardy said, B2, 3 days before it's passable. You're welcome to stay till then, if you're willing to work for your keep. We're grateful, Eleanor said. Though we wouldn't want to impose. No imposition. Mrs., Hardy said firmly. Been too long since we had company. Gets lonesome out here. They were given a small room off the kitchen. As they settled in for the night, Eleanor felt awkward for the first time since declaring herself Jake's wife. They'd been sleeping near each other on the trail, but this was different. A real bed. Walls around them. The assumption of marriage hanging in the air. I'll take the floor, Jake offered. Don't be ridiculous. You're injured. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly fascinated by her borrowed boots. We're both adults. We can share a bed without... That is... Eleanor. Jake sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she felt his warmth. What you did today, coming back for me, standing with me, that meant everything. But I want you to know I don't expect... I won't assume. Eleanor turned to face him, seeing uncertainty in the eyes of a man who'd faced down 7 armed men without flinching. Jake Thornton. Are you trying to tell me you'll respect my honor? Something like that. She laughed softly. My honor was forfeit the moment I ran away with a horse and a gun. What I have now is my choice, and I choose to trust you. They lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, careful not to touch. But as Eleanor drifted toward sleep, her hand found his in the darkness, his fingers intertwined with hers, and that simple connection said more than words ever could. She woke in the gray pre-dawn to find Jake sitting by the window, keeping watch even here. Old habits, she supposed. He turned when she stirred. Couldn't sleep. Storm's coming back, he said. Different kind this time. Eleanor joined him at the window. What do you mean? Riders passed by an hour ago, heading toward Culverson, moving quiet, trying not to be seen. His expression was grim. Could be nothing. Could be Carson's men looking for us. What do we do? We help the Hardys like we promised. We heal up, and we get ready to run again. He looked at her, something soft in his eyes. This is what it'll be like. Eleanor, always looking over our shoulders, never able to settle. You sure this is what you want? Eleanor thought about it, really thought about it. The Hardys' ranch was peaceful, safe, the kind of life she'd once imagined for herself. But it was also a cage of a different sort, walls built of routine and expectation. I'm sure, she said. But Jake, what if we didn't run? What if we faced Carson, ended this once and for all? Man like Carson doesn't face anybody straight on. He sends others to do his killing. Jake's jaw tightened. Though maybe it's time that changed. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Carson believes I'm heading west, running from his bounty. What if we turned east instead? Went to him? Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. That's suicide. Maybe, or maybe it's the only way to ever be free. He turned from the window, decision crystallizing in his eyes. But first, we get you somewhere safe. This isn't your fight. We've had this argument before, Eleanor reminded him. I thought I made my position clear. That was before. Before what? Before I chose you? Before I stood beside you against Big Jim? Eleanor crossed her arms. I'm not some delicate flower you need to protect. Jake, not anymore. You made sure of that. They stared at each other, wills clashing. Then Jake smiled, small and rueful. Maria would have liked you. She had that same stubborn streak. Then honor her memory by not trying to face this alone. Outside, the sun began to rise, painting the storm-washed world in shades of gold. Somewhere out there. Carson's men hunted. Somewhere out there. Their future waited. Uncertain. Dangerous, but theirs to claim. Jake pulled her close, and Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm had tested them, stripped away everything but the essential truth. They were stronger together than apart. All right, Jake said quietly. We do this together, but first, we learn what we're up against. And we get you proper trained with that Colt. Eleanor smiled against his shirt. I thought you'd never ask. 3 days passed at the Hardy Ranch like a gift of borrowed time. Jake's wound healed clean under Mrs. Hardy's care, and Eleanor learned the rhythms of ranch life, feeding chickens, mending fences, the simple satisfaction of honest work, but both knew it couldn't last. On the fourth morning, Jake stood at the fence line, watching the eastern horizon. Eleanor joined him, noting the tension in his shoulders. "It's time," he said simply. She nodded. They'd prepared for this moment, gathering supplies, planning their route. The Hardys had asked no questions when Jake requested ammunition, though Mr. Hardy's eyes had been knowing. That evening, as they shared a final meal with their hosts, Mrs. Hardy pressed a wrapped bundle into Eleanor's hands. "Trail food," she said, "and a few other things a woman might need." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Thank you for everything." "You remind me of myself at your age," Mrs. Hardy said quietly. "Following my Samuel out here when everyone said I was mad. Sometimes the heart knows better than the head." They left before dawn, the Hardys insisting they take a pack horse loaded with provisions. Jake had tried to pay more than the animals were worth, but Mr. Hardy had waved him off. "Just remember us kindly," the old rancher said, "and if you ever pass this way again." The invitation hung unfinished, fragile as morning frost. They all knew the odds of Jake and Eleanor returning were slim. They rode east toward Carson's territory, but Jake took them on a winding route, visiting places he remembered from his life before, at a hidden spring. He showed Eleanor where he and Maria had carved their initials in a cottonwood tree. The marks were weathered but visible, a testament to love that outlasted life. "She was my first," Jake said, tracing the letters. "First woman I ever loved. First person who made me want to be better than I was." Eleanor dismounted and stood beside him. "Tell me about her. Really tell me." So Jake did, speaking of a laughing girl who'd seen past his rough edges, who'd made their small ranch into a home. He talked until his voice went hoarse, purging 5 years of silence. When he finished, Eleanor took his hand. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Jake turned to face her. "But she's gone, and you're here. And Eleanor May, I need you to know, you're not some replacement for her. What I feel for you, it's different, deeper, maybe, because it was forged in fire and truth instead of innocence." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Jake, I love you," he said simply. "Not because you remind me of her, but because you're you, because you came back when you could have run, because you stand beside me, even knowing what it costs." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision. "I love you too. I think I have since you handed me that canteen and called me a fool without saying the words." He kissed her then, there beneath the tree that held his past, and Eleanor felt something shift between them, a claiming and a releasing, a promise that needed no witnesses but the desert wind. They camped that night in a box canyon Jake knew, defensible and hidden. As they sat by the fire, Eleanor practiced with the Colt until her aim was true more often than not. Jake watched with approval. "You've come a long way from the scared girl at the waterhole." "I had a good teacher." Eleanor holstered the gun with growing confidence. "Jake, when we face Carson, we'll be ready." His eyes were hard as flint. "I've run from him for 5 years, no more." The next day brought them to the edge of Carson's realm, marked by a change in the land itself. Here, water rights were controlled. Small ranchers squeezed out, the earth bearing the scars of greed. They stopped at a ridge overlooking a valley where a grand house sat like a spider in its web. Carson spread, Jake said. "Biggest in 3 counties, all built on blood and theft." Eleanor studied the layout with strategic eyes, noting the bunkhouses, the corrals, the roads in and out. "How many men?" 20, maybe 30. But Carson's smart. He keeps the really dangerous ones close. Jake pointed to a smaller building set apart. "That's where he plans his schemes, where he counted the money after Maria." His voice trailed off, but Eleanor understood. Where Carson had celebrated his brother's crimes. They made camp in the hills, close enough to watch but far enough to avoid patrols. That night, Eleanor lay in Jake's arms. feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Are you frightened?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But not of dying, of losing you, of failing. You won't fail." His arms tightened around her. "You're the strongest person I know, Eleanor May. And tomorrow, we end this." The plan was simple, perhaps too simple. Jake would ride in at dawn, calling Carson out. While every eye focused on him, Eleanor would circle around, take position with Jake's rifle. Insurance. He called it, just in case Carson didn't play fair. "He won't face you alone," Eleanor predicted. "No, but he's proud. He'll want to be there when I fall. That's when he's vulnerable." Jake's smile was sharp as a blade. Man like Carson always thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Time to prove him wrong. They rose before dawn, preparing in silence. Jake checked his Colts one last time while Eleanor loaded the rifle, hands steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. When it was time to part, they held each other fierce and quick. "Remember," Jake said, "if things go bad, I run. I know." Eleanor managed to smile. "But things won't go bad. We're going to win, and we're going to build that ranch you dreamed about, and we're going to live until we're old and gray. From your mouth to God's ears." He kissed her once more, then mounted his horse. "See you on the other side, Mrs. Thornton." Eleanor watched him ride toward the valley, straight-backed and proud. Then she took her own position, settling in with the rifle, becoming one with the rocks and shadows. The rising sun painted the valley gold and red, like blood not yet spilled. From her vantage point, she saw Jake reach the compound, heard his voice ring out clear and strong. "Robert Carson, Jake Thornton's come calling. Time to settle our accounts." Men poured from the buildings like disturbed ants. Eleanor counted, cataloged, identified Carson himself when he emerged from the main house. A thin man with silver hair and the bearing of a king in his castle. Words were exchanged, too distant for Eleanor to hear clearly. But she saw the moment Carson gave some signal, saw his men fan out in a half circle. Jake stood alone in the center, hands easy at his sides. Eleanor sighted down the rifle, picking her target. Not Carson. Jake had claimed that right. But the man creeping around Jake's blind spot, thinking himself clever. When the moment came, she'd be ready. The sun climbed higher, tension stretching tight as wire. Then Carson spoke again, his voice carrying on the still air. "You killed my brother. Your brother was a rabid dog." Jake replied, "I put him down. He was blood. He was a monster who hurt women for sport. The world's better without him." Carson's face contorted. "Kill him." Everything happened at once. Jake's Colts cleared leather faster than thought, dropping 2 men before they could aim. Eleanor squeezed the trigger, taking down the flanking gunman. Chaos erupted in the compound as men dove for cover, unsure where the rifle fire originated. Jake moved like a force of nature, every motion purposeful, every shot counting. But there were too many, and Eleanor could only guard one angle. She fired, reloaded, fired again, trying to even the odds. Then she saw him, a rifleman on the roof, drawing a bead on Jake, too far for a pistol shot, too focused on his target to notice Eleanor. She held her breath, squeezed the trigger. The man tumbled from the roof, his shot going wild, but the distraction cost her. By the time she'd worked the rifle's action, Carson had retreated to cover, and his remaining men had found defensive positions. Jake was pinned down behind a water trough, trading shots with 3 gunmen. Eleanor made a decision. Leaving the rifle, she drew the Colt and began working her way down the hillside. Jake had taught her to shoot, but he'd also taught her tactics. Sometimes the best move was the unexpected one. She reached the compound's edge undetected, using outbuildings for cover. The remaining gunmen were focused on Jake, convinced the rifle threat had been neutralized. Eleanor crept closer, heart pounding. Then she heard Jake cry out, hit, though she couldn't see how badly. The sound tore through her like a blade. No more stealth, no more patience. Eleanor stepped into the open. "Carson!" The silver-haired man turned, surprise flickering across his face. Eleanor stood 20 feet away, Colt steady in her hand. "The woman," Carson sneered. "Tom told me about you, Jake's little desert flower." "Tom's dead," Eleanor said. "So's Big Jim Calhoun. And now you." Carson laughed. You're going to kill me?" "No," Eleanor smiled, cold as winter. "I'm going to let Jake do that. I'm just here to make sure it's fair." She fired, taking Carson's gun hand. He screamed, dropping his weapon, clutching the bloody appendage. His men hesitated, unsure whether to target her or Jake. That moment's hesitation was all Jake needed. He rose from cover, left arm hanging useless but right hand steady. His Colt boomed once. Carson looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, disbelief replacing arrogance. You can't." "For Maria," Jake said quietly. "And for all the others you've hurt." Carson fell to his knees, then forward. The fight went out of his men like air from a punctured bladder. Weapons clattered to the ground. In minutes, they were riding hard for the horizon, leaderless and broken. Eleanor ran to Jake, catching him as his knees buckled. Blood seeped from a graze on his temple and a deeper wound in his shoulder. But he was alive. Blessedly, wonderfully alive. "Told you to run if things went bad," he murmured. "Things didn't go bad. We won." Eleanor pressed her forehead to his. "It's over. Jake, it's finally over." They stayed at Carson's compound just long enough to tend wounds and gather what they needed. The safe in Carson's office held more than enough to start fresh somewhere new. Honest money mixed with blood money, but money all the same. As they prepared to leave, Jake paused at the main house's door. "We could stay. Place is ours by right of conquest." Eleanor looked around at the grand rooms, the luxury built on suffering. "No, too many ghosts here. I want something we build together, not something stolen from the dead." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Maria would have said the same thing. They rode west as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of hope. In Culverson, they'd find a preacher to make official what their hearts already knew. Then further west, to California maybe, where the past couldn't follow and the future waited to be written. "You saved my life," Jake said as they rode. "Again, we saved each other." Eleanor reached over to take his hand. "That's what partners do. Partners." Jake tested the word, found it good. "I like the sound of that." The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving but no longer threatening. They'd been tested by heat and storm, by men and guns, by their own fears and doubts. They'd survived it all. More than survived. They'd triumphed. Two wounded souls who'd found strength in each other, who'd chosen love over fear, standing together over running alone. The desert had brought them together, and now it released them to seek their fortune elsewhere. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Eleanor remembered that first night, when Jake had taught her to find her way by their light. Now she needed no guidance but the man beside her, no direction but forward. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked. "That I'm glad I stole that horse," Eleanor said. "Glad I ran into the desert like a fool. Glad you decided to help a stubborn woman who didn't know enough to be properly grateful. And I'm glad you didn't listen when I told you to run." Jake raised their joined hands to his lips. "Glad you're as stubborn as you are beautiful. Glad you're mine. Yours and my own," Eleanor corrected. "Never just one or the other. Wouldn't have it any other way." They rode on through the gathering dark, toward Culverson and marriage and a life built on choice rather than circumstance. Behind them, the past lay buried with the men who'd tried to own them. Ahead waited infinite possibility. Eleanor had fled Carson Creek as property, terrified and alone. She rode toward her future as a free woman, partner to a man who'd taught her strength, who'd given her the tools to save herself and chosen to stand beside her as an equal. The desert had been her crucible. Jake, her unlikely salvation. Together, they'd written a different ending to their stories. Not tragedy, but triumph. Not death, but life. Not separation, but union. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, witness to one more love story carved from the harsh beauty of the American West. And somewhere in that vast sky, Eleanor imagined Maria smiling down, glad that the man she'd loved had found his way back to life, back to love, back to hope. The beginning was ending. The real story, their story, was just about to begin. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'm curious to know where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere out in the wide open spaces that inspired these stories. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback and stories mean the world to us, and they help us craft more tales of love, courage, and adventure from the American frontier. Until next time, partners.